The encounter. Cade Mercer hadn't planned on meeting anyone interesting during his shift in Maintenance Sector 7 of Helios Station. The orbital platform orbiting Jupiter's moon Europa wasn't exactly a hotspot for excitement. His job consisted mainly of fixing climate regulators, patching hull breaches, and occasionally rebooting the station's temperamental AI assistant, which insisted on speaking exclusively in rhyming couplets. The day everything changed started with a power fluctuation in the lower markets. Cade had been elbow-deep in a malfunctioning recycling unit when his comm buzzed. "Maintenance, we've got reports of unstable gravity in the Nexus market." Some vendor's fusion cookware nearly floated into an ambassador's face, his supervisor grumbled. Cade sighed, wiping grimy hands on his already stained jumpsuit. "On my way." The Nexus market was Helios Station's crown jewel, a sprawling bazaar where traders from 17 systems hawked everything from Martian dust wine to quantum-entangled pets that always knew when you were looking at them. Cade hated it. Too many people, too many smells, and too many opportunities for things to break. He pushed through the crowd, toolkit banging against his hip. The gravity stabilizer was located beneath a section of flooring near a stall selling what appeared to be luminescent fungi. As he knelt to remove the floor panel, a hush fell over the nearby crowd. That's when he first saw her. She moved through the market like water flowing around stones, effortless, purposeful. Her cloak was the color of midnight, hood pulled low, but not low enough to hide her face. And what a face it was! Her skin seemed to shift between textures as she moved, in one moment smooth as polished metal, the next weathered like ancient stone. Geometric patterns traced her jawline and temples, tiny symbols that appeared to move when he wasn't looking directly at them. But her eyes, those were what stopped him cold. They weren't any color found in human genetics. They glowed like twin nebulae, swirling with stars and cosmic dust, contracting and expanding with her pulse. Cade realized he was staring only when she stopped directly in front of him. "You're in my way," she said, her voice like distant thunder. He blinked twice, scrambling to his feet. "Sorry, I was just, maintenance." He gestured vaguely at the floor panel. "You were staring." The way she said it wasn't accusatory, just factual. "Well, yeah," Cade admitted, surprising himself with his honesty. "You have stars in your eyes." One corner of her mouth twitched, not quite a smile. "That's a terrible line." "Not a line, just an observation. I fix things. I observe problems." He paused. "Not that you're a problem." "I am, actually," she replied, and something in her voice made him believe her. Before he could respond, a commotion erupted at the market entrance. 3 figures in unmarked gray uniforms pushed through the crowd, their movements synchronized with military precision. The woman's posture changed instantly, from fluid to coiled steel. "They found me," she whispered. Without thinking, Cade grabbed her arm and pulled her down behind the open floor panel. "In here. Maintenance tunnels. They run through the whole station." She hesitated for only a fraction of a second before sliding into the narrow opening. Cade followed, pulling the panel shut above them just as heavy footsteps approached. The maintenance tunnel was barely tall enough to crouch in, bathed in the dull red glow of emergency lighting. Condensation dripped from coolant pipes overhead, and the distant hum of the station's core vibrated through the metal floors. "Who are you running from?" Cade asked, leading her deeper into the labyrinth of service passages. "People who want what I carry," she replied, her nebula eyes scanning the darkness behind them. "And what's that?" She studied him, her gaze seemingly peering into parts of him that even he didn't know existed. "My name is Leora. And you shouldn't have helped me. I'm Cade." "And you're welcome," he replied with a wry smile. "Where did you come from?" "I've seen a lot of off-worlders, but never anyone with." He gestured vaguely at her eyes. "A dead world." Her voice was flat. "One that no longer exists in any database or star chart." Cade stopped walking. "That's not possible. Even destroyed worlds are recorded." Not when someone wants to erase all evidence that you ever existed. Leora pushed past him, moving with certainty through tunnels she shouldn't have known. We need to keep moving. They emerged in Sector 12, a rarely used storage area filled with decommissioned shuttle parts and crates of outdated tech. Cade used his maintenance codes to unlock a small room once used for inventory processing. We should be safe here for a while, he said, activating the dim lights. Station security doesn't patrol this sector often. Leora paced the small space, her cloak swirling around her ankles. I need to reach the communications array. The primary one, not the public channels. That's in the restricted section. You'd need high-level clearance, Cade began. Can you get me there or not? She interrupted. Not without knowing why. He crossed his arms. Look, I just committed about 7 security violations helping you. Those weren't station guards back there, were they? Leora's shoulders dropped slightly. She reached into her cloak and withdrew a small crystalline object that pulsed with internal light. It resembled a teardrop, its surface etched with the same shifting patterns that marked her skin. This contains the entire history, language, and cultural memory of my people, she said softly. I am the last Arcavian. We were removed. Removed? You mean? Systematically erased from existence. Her eyes darkened, the stars within them turning to dying embers. Our planet was destroyed, our colonies dismantled, our records deleted from every network in connected space. Cade sank onto a crate. Why would anyone do that? Because we discovered something we weren't supposed to know. She closed her fingers around the crystal. This needs to be broadcast on subspace frequencies. Once it enters the data networks, it can never be completely erased again. My people will exist in memory, if nowhere else. A shudder ran through the station, not the normal vibration of life support systems, but something deeper, more violent. The lights flickered. Cade's comm unit crackled to life. Emergency protocols initiated. Unknown vessels have breached station defenses. All personnel report to emergency stations. Leora's gaze met his. They found us. They're here for this. She raised the crystal. Before Cade could respond, the door to their hideout shuddered under a heavy impact. Metal groaned as something powerful tried to force it open. Is there another way out? Leora asked, voice calm despite the situation. Cade moved to a ventilation panel in the corner. Hope you don't mind tight spaces. As he worked to remove the panel, he glanced back at her. Why did you tell me to look away when we met, but you keep watching me like I'm a puzzle? She almost smiled then, a genuine expression that transformed her face. Because I've spent years avoiding connection. It's safer that way. And now? Now I need someone who knows this station. She stepped closer. And perhaps I'm tired of being the last of my kind, carrying memories no one else shares. The door buckled inward as Cade removed the panel. Ladies first, he said with a forced smile. Leora ducked into the ventilation shaft, the crystal clutched tightly in her hand. Cade followed just as the door finally gave way, revealing 3 figures with weapons that hummed with energy no civilian should possess. The last thing Cade saw before sealing the vent behind them was those cold, empty eyes scanning the room, eyes nothing like Leora's living stars, eyes that held no light at all. The revelation. The ventilation shaft narrowed as they crawled deeper into the station's infrastructure. Cade led the way, guided by memory and the maintenance schematics he'd studied during countless night shifts. Behind him, Leora moved with surprising silence despite her unfamiliarity with the station. We're approaching Junction 17, Cade whispered over his shoulder. From there, we can access the central communication hub through the emergency maintenance corridors. How much farther? Leora's voice betrayed no fatigue, but Cade noticed the subtle strain in it. About half a kilometer. The hard part will be getting past the security protocols once we're there. A distant rumble shook the shaft, dislodging years of accumulated dust. Cade paused, pressing his ear against the metal wall. "They're using scanning pulses," Leora said. "Standard sweep pattern. They're methodical." "Who exactly are they?" Cade asked as they continued forward. There was a long pause before Leora answered. "They call themselves arbiters. They maintain what they consider the correct flow of history and technological development. By erasing entire civilizations, my people developed something they believed would destabilize the established order." Her voice hardened. "A way to communicate across dimensional barriers without the usual energy requirements." They reached Junction 17, a cramped intersection where multiple shafts converged. Cade pried open a small hatch in the floor, revealing a ladder descending into darkness. "Watch your step," he warned as he lowered himself down. The emergency corridor was narrow but tall enough to stand in. Red emergency lights cast long shadows as they moved swiftly through the passage. "So these arbiters wiped out your entire civilization because you discovered better communication technology?" Cade asked, incredulous. Leora's eyes flashed in the dim light. "It wasn't just communication. It was connection, between minds, between realities. My people believed consciousness itself was the fundamental building block of the universe, not matter or energy. And that threatened them. Knowledge always threatens those who maintain power through ignorance." Leora touched the wall as they walked, her fingers tracing invisible patterns. "They feared what might come through if we opened those doors." A security door blocked their path, its access panel glowing red. Cade approached it, pulling a modified scanner from his toolkit. "Station security has been upgraded twice since I built this bypass," he muttered, connecting the device to the panel. "No guarantees." As he worked, Leora withdrew the crystal again. In the confined space of the corridor, its light seemed brighter, illuminating her face from below. The markings on her skin pulsed in rhythm with the crystal's glow. "What exactly is on that thing?" Cade asked without looking up from his work. "Everything," she replied softly. "Art, science, philosophy, memories, the collective consciousness of billions of lives spanning thousands of years. Not just information, experience." The security door beeped and slid open. Cade pocketed his bypass device with a satisfied grin. "Still got it. We're one level below the communication hub now." The corridor ahead widened into a rarely used maintenance bay. As they stepped inside, Cade activated the emergency lighting, revealing rows of backup communication equipment. "This is an auxiliary broadcasting station," he explained. "Used only during critical failures. It's not as powerful as the main array, but it connects to the same network." Leora approached the central console, her movements suddenly hesitant. "Will it reach beyond this system?" "It'll reach everywhere. This station is a major communication relay point for the outer colonies." Cade began activating the dormant systems. "Once something enters this network, it spreads like a virus, impossible to contain completely." As the equipment hummed to life, Leora stood motionless, the crystal cradled in her palms. "I've carried this for so long," she whispered, almost to herself. "When they came for my world, I was off-planet, conducting research. I watched from orbit as they systematically erased everything I'd ever known." Cade stopped working and turned to her. "How long have you been running? Time becomes difficult to measure when you're the only one left." Her nebula eyes fixed on his. "Decades, perhaps. I stopped counting after the first few years." Something in her expression made Cade's chest tighten. He'd seen loneliness before, hell, he'd chosen this remote posting to embrace his own, but this was different. This was isolation on a scale he couldn't comprehend. "The system's online," he said, breaking the moment. "It needs final authorization codes, but I can bypass those too. It'll just take a few minutes." Leora nodded and approached the main console. "Once it begins broadcasting, we'll have very little time. The signal will immediately alert the arbiters." "And then what?" She placed the crystal in a scanning receptacle. Then we run. Or we fight. Or we die. I haven't planned beyond this moment for a very long time. As Cade worked on the final security protocols, the station shuddered again, more violently this time. Emergency lights flickered, and a distant alarm began wailing. "They're getting closer," Leora noted calmly. "Almost there," Cade muttered, fingers flying across the interface. "Just need to." The console suddenly illuminated with green confirmation lights. "We're in. The system is ready." Leora placed her hand on the activation sequence, then hesitated. "Once this begins, there's no turning back. Your involvement puts you in danger." Cade shrugged. "Pretty sure that ship launched when I pulled you into a maintenance tunnel. Besides, I've been wanting a career change." The ghost of a smile crossed her face. "Why did you help me?" "You didn't know me. You still don't." "Because you looked like you needed it," he answered honestly. "And because when I saw your eyes, I knew there was something worth preserving there." Before she could respond, the maintenance bay door exploded inward. 3 arbiters stepped through the smoke, their featureless helmets scanning the room. Energy weapons hummed as they raised them in perfect unison. "Step away from the console," the lead figure commanded, voice distorted through the helmet's filter. Cade moved instinctively, positioning himself between Leora and the intruders. "Sorry, we're in the middle of some critical maintenance. Union regulations state that interrupting essential systems work is a violation of." Silence. The arbiter's weapon shifted to target his chest. "The Arcavian anomaly ends here. The timeline will be preserved." Leora's hand hovered over the activation panel. "My people existed," she said, her voice ringing with centuries of defiance. "We lived, we loved, we created wonders you tried to erase. I am not an anomaly, I am witness." "Final warning," the arbiter stated. "The consequences of memory contamination are beyond your comprehension." Cade glanced at Leora, reading the determination in her stellar eyes. In that moment, a decision crystallized in his mind with surprising clarity. "You know," he said conversationally to the arbiters, "working maintenance teaches you something important." The lead arbiter tilted its head slightly. "And what is that?" "Always have a backup system." Cade slammed his hand onto an emergency override panel on the wall. The maintenance bay plunged into darkness as the primary power cut out. In the 3 seconds of total blackness before the emergency systems engaged, Cade pulled Leora down behind the console as energy blasts scorched the air where they had stood. The crystal in the receptacle began to glow with increasing intensity, pulsing with light that seemed to bend around corners, illuminating the room despite the darkness. "It's starting!" Leora exclaimed. "The broadcast sequence has initiated." The crystal's light expanded, projecting shifting patterns of symbols and images onto every surface. The air itself seemed to vibrate with whispered voices, millions of them, speaking in harmonies that resonated on frequencies beyond normal hearing. The arbiters advanced, their weapons charging for another volley. But they moved with sudden uncertainty, their coordinated precision faltering as the broadcast intensified. "What's happening to them?" Cade asked as he watched the lead arbiter stumble. "The memories," Leora whispered, awe in her voice. "They're experiencing my people's memories, our art, our thoughts, our existence. They can't process it all at once." The crystal's light grew blinding, filling the room with cascading waves of color and sound. Cade shielded his eyes, but through his fingers, he could see the arbiters dropping their weapons, hands pressed against their helmets as if in pain. "Is it supposed to do that?" he shouted over the rising hum. Leora's face was transformed by the light, her markings glowing with the same intensity as the crystal. "It's more powerful than I expected. The connection is forming." The lead arbiter collapsed to his knees, helmet cracking open to reveal a surprisingly human face contorted in confusion. What are you doing to us?" "Not doing," Leora corrected, stepping forward into the maelstrom of light. "Sharing." What you tried to erase is now becoming part of you, part of everyone connected to this network. The broadcast reached its peak intensity, and for one breathtaking moment, Cade felt it too, fragments of lives lived on a world he'd never seen, knowledge of sciences beyond current understanding, the texture of emotions expressed in ways humans had never conceived. It was overwhelming, beautiful, and terrifying all at once. Then, as suddenly as it had begun, the light receded. The crystal in the receptacle crumbled into shimmering dust that hung in the air briefly before dispersing. Leora stood in the center of the room, her cloak billowing around her though there was no wind. The markings on her skin had changed, no longer shifting, but stable, complete. The arbiters lay unconscious on the floor, their weapons inactive beside them. "Is it done?" Cade asked, approaching her carefully. Leora turned to him, and he gasped. Her eyes were no longer swirling nebulae, they were normal, human eyes, a deep amber color. "It's done," she confirmed, her voice both heavier and lighter somehow. "My people live now in the collective memory of connected space. Their knowledge, their art, their existence can never be fully erased again." "And you?" Cade gestured at her changed appearance. She touched her face, fingers tracing the now static patterns on her skin. "I was the vessel. The last Arcavian, modified to carry our essence until it could be safely released." A single tear traced down her cheek. "I am still Leora, but I am also just, me again." Distant alarms continued to sound throughout the station. The battle wasn't over, there would be more arbiters, more threats. But something fundamental had changed in the universe in the last few minutes. "What happens now?" Cade asked. Leora looked at him, really looked at him, perhaps for the first time without the burden of an entire civilization weighing on her. "I don't know. For the first time in longer than I can remember, I don't have a mission." She held out her hand, and after a moment's hesitation, Cade took it. "Maybe," he suggested with a tentative smile, "we run. Or we fight. Or we live. One day at a time." Her fingers tightened around his. "I think I'd like that." As they made their way out of the maintenance bay, leaving behind the unconscious arbiters and the dust of an ancient memory, Leora glanced back one last time. "Thank you," she said softly, "for looking at me when I told you to look away." Cade just smiled. "I've never been very good at following instructions." Together, they disappeared into the depths of the station, two people with an uncertain future but, for the first time in a long while, the freedom to choose it.